Tonight, we are witnessing a moment of reckoning that absolutely no one anticipated. The curtain is being pulled back by gospel star turned truth teller, Andria Johnson, exposing Brian Carn in a revelation filled with faith, power, and a stunning moment of reality now brought into the light. What unfolds next will leave you in disbelief. One thing is undeniable: mention the name Pastor Brian Carn, and emotions instantly flare. Admired by many, questioned by just as many, he remains one of the most divided and debated figures in today's ministry world. Recognized for his intense prophetic gifting and undeniable stage command, Carn has built a massive kingdom of followers who believe he's an anointed man chosen by God himself. But beneath the bright lights, beyond the sermons, and past the viral highlights, a storm has been quietly gathering, one that even his prophetic voice never predicted. And standing at the very center of that storm is none other than Andria Johnson, the gospel powerhouse whose unfiltered transparency and unmatched vocal talent have made her both loved and criticized. She's been the voice for the wounded, the restored, and the overlooked. But the moment she chose to publicly reveal what she saw, lived, and experienced in connection to Pastor Brian Carn, everything exploded. The internet lit up, not because this was a petty clash between two church celebrities, but because it was an unveiling, a rare glimpse beyond the altar, past the prophetic label, behind the emotionally charged moments that captivate millions. There was no script, no media training, no sugarcoating. What Andria shared was emotional, raw, bold, and deeply personal. A truth that struck differently because it wasn't sourced from gossip pages or faceless insiders.
It came directly from someone who walked in those rooms, witnessed it firsthand, and carried the weight of it. And the revelations she made about Brian Carn shook the very foundation of the church and gospel world. But to truly grasp the depth of why her words landed so powerfully, why they stung the way they did, we have to go back. Because Pastor Brian Carn's story isn't just a simple fame narrative. It is a complex journey of spiritual gifting, human imperfection, and the dangerous crossroads where divine influence meets celebrity power. So before we reach the moment when Andria finally declared enough is enough, we have to rewind to the beginning. This is the real story: Pastor Brian Carn's rise, his unraveling, and the moment Andria Johnson finally revealed what many say the world had been waiting to hear, long before controversy, backlash, or viral headlines. There was just a young boy in Jacksonville, Florida, whose life seemed pre-written for ministry. Brian Carn wasn't a child born into spotlight, he was born into belief, born into faith. According to those who watched him grow, the church didn't just shape him, it called to him. By age 12, while children his age were focused on classrooms and playgrounds, Brian was already stepping into pulpits, preaching, prophesying, and moving audiences across the Southern church circuit. People who heard him in those early beginnings recall something almost unexplainable: a young boy carrying the weight and wisdom of something much older. He spoke with conviction, fire, and a level of authority that felt far beyond his years. And it was his prophetic gift, the ability to deliver messages he believed were spoken directly from God, that quickly became his trademark. By the time his teenage years arrived, clips of his intense sermons and startlingly accurate prophecies were spreading, pushing him to the forefront of the Black, Pentecostal, and prophetic movement. In an era where boldness and charisma often paved the path faster than degrees or titles, Brian Carn began ascending rapidly. Unstoppable by all appearances, when his name was announced, churches overflowed beyond capacity. Crowds didn't just gather, they traveled for him, driving hours, flying across states, desperate for a divine word spoken through his voice. The label soon followed: Prophet to the Nations, a title heavy with reverence, pressure, and expectation, and with influence that powerful, doors didn't just open, they swung wide. Television ministries, celebrity believers, and megachurch platforms all sought alignment with his gift. His voice was no longer just heard in sanctuaries, it was booming across nations. The young Florida preacher was no longer just a hometown marvel. He had now officially stepped into the territory of nationwide recognition. But as the spotlight intensified, so did the skepticism. Behind every thunderous amen, there were murmurs, questions aimed at his delivery, his doctrine, and his dollars. The prophetic arena has always existed on a fragile tightrope between spiritual conviction and public performance, because the moment someone asserts that they speak directly for God, the weight of expectation becomes overwhelming. And it didn't take long before quiet conversations grew louder, turning into public criticism. Soon, critics began claiming that his prophetic declarations weren't original. Side-by-side video clips started circulating, appearing to show his prophecies mirroring ones spoken by other prophets years earlier. The accusations of stolen prophecy and borrowed inspiration shook his credibility to its core. Carn rejected every allegation outright. He labeled the backlash as jealousy, demonic interference, and attacks from those unable to grasp his spiritual gifting. And yet, even as the accusations swirled, his rise refused to slow. If anything, every new criticism made him even louder, bolder, and more determined to validate that he was, in fact, divinely appointed. He went on to launch his own congregation, Kingdom City Church, drawing massive crowds to conferences, services, and online broadcasts. He crafted an identity that straddled two worlds at once: part traditional pastor, part modern-era celebrity prophet. His wardrobe sharpened, his stage execution elevated, his sermons growing more theatrical and emotionally charged with every passing season to his supporters. He was no ordinary preacher, he was a conduit of miracles. A man who could discern pain before it was spoken, foresee destiny before it arrived, and guide believers into supernatural breakthrough. But history's proven time and time again, every meteoric spiritual rise eventually meets its moment of testing. And though Pastor Brian Carn stood strong in public, away from the platform, fractures had quietly begun forming beneath his feet. Concerns emerged surrounding his inner circle, his personal relationships, financial transparency, and the company he kept. For the first time, the pristine image so meticulously curated began to lose its sharpness around the edges. Even so, no one, not even his harshest critics, could have anticipated what was coming. Because in the chapters that followed, his life would intersect with a woman whose fearless nature rivaled his only Andria Johnson, and when their paths finally collided, every rumor that once lived in the dark was about to be dragged into the open. But before we reach the moment Andria brought it all to the public eye, it's important to understand why her testimony carried such undeniable weight. Long before she became the woman willing to call out spiritual giants and shine light on uncomfortable truth, Andria Johnson's name already commanded respect in gospel music for one undeniable reason: her voice, a voice powerful enough to soften the hardest heart. A voice not molded in conservatories or engineered by studio executives, but forged in struggle, survival, and genuine life experience. Andria burst onto the mainstream gospel scene when she won Best Sunday Best in 2010. And overnight, the world was introduced to a young woman whose authenticity couldn't be manufactured, duplicated, or rehearsed. She didn't carry the polished image of a conventional gospel artist. She never flinched from letting tears fall mid-song, feet never fall mid-song, lifting her voice into a shout, or showing moments of brokenness in full view. She made no attempt to mask her imperfections, she wore them with honesty. And in a genre that often praised presentation over transparency, her rawness became her power. Her music wasn't merely sung, it was lived. When grace left her lips, you believed it. When mercy moved her to tears, you knew it was real. She became the soundtrack of the overlooked, the wounded, and the believers who wrestled with faith yet still clung to it. The people who felt spiritually unworthy but refused to let go of God. But with elevation came pressure. The same church culture that adored her vocal anointing wasn't always comfortable with her unfiltered reality. Andria didn't conform, didn't censor, and didn't fit into the clean-cut expectations often placed on gospel figures. She refused to sugarcoat anything. She was loud, raw, and completely transparent about her battles, whether it was alcohol, failed relationships, or the turbulence that came with sudden fame. In a world where many gospel figures carefully concealed their broken places, she put hers on full display. But that kind of honesty came with consequences. To many in church leadership, her transparency wasn't authenticity, it was defiance. She was branded as complicated, chaotic, and at times even a threat. Yet to countless believers who had been wounded or pushed aside by religious systems, she felt like a lifeline. That's why her eventual clash with Pastor Brian Carn shook the world so violently, because unlike outside critics throwing stones from a distance, Andria came from within the same circle. She knew the weight of ministry, the unspoken rules, the internal power plays, the pressure that outsiders never get to see. Allegedly, her connection to Brian Carn began organically through shared ministry spaces, gospel showcases, prophetic revivals, church conferences, spiritual platforms. They navigated the same environments, carried similar influence, and eventually, their worlds intertwined within the same faith-based community. But beyond public stages and shared rooms, strain quietly began forming beneath the surface. Sources close to the matter state that Andria, already disenchanted with what she considered the growing insincerity of church leadership, started recognizing patterns in Pastor Carn that unsettled her spirit. She felt his sermons leaned more toward dominance than disciple-esap. To her, his public ministry persona was starting to resemble a production more than a calling. She witnessed layers of him most never saw and subjects most never dared vocalize. So when she eventually broke her silence, it wasn't rooted in resentment but revelation. She insisted she could no longer watch in silence while countless believers were being spiritually mishandled and misdirected. Then came the moment that detonated across the internet in a fiery live stream that spread at lightning speed. Andria Johnson unloaded everything. She didn't hold back. She challenged the legitimacy of Carn's prophetic ministry, his moral consistency, and what she viewed as a system of control built around him. There was no script, no filter, no media strategy. Only emotion, exhaustion, and spiritual outrage. She didn't wrap her words in ministry cliches or public relations softness. She spoke like someone who had carried the burden too long, someone who could no longer look away. She condemned what she called prophetic theatrics, spiritual theatrics, manufactured moments, and the monetization of people's faith for celebrity elevation. In her eyes, the sacred was being repackaged into spectacle. "People are in pain," she cried, "and y'all are treating God like a show." That moment stopped everything. Those words became more than a statement, they became a movement. Clips circulated everywhere. Debates erupted, comment sections turned into battlegrounds, and suddenly the conversation shifted. Brian Carn's name was no longer circulating because of sermons or revivals. It was trending for controversy. And the impact grew deeper when it became clear she wasn't a lone voice. More individuals stepped forward, some publicly, others anonymously with their own grievances, not just about Carn, but about the growing culture of ministry influencers who seemed addicted to admiration more than assignment. Andria had hit the pressure point. She said what countless others had whispered but were terrified to utter aloud. And the aftershock of her honesty rattled one of the most shielded power structures in the Black church world, the prophetic hierarchy. But while some applauded her bravery, others saw betrayal. To Pastor Carn's loyal supporters, her words weren't truth. They were treachery. They labeled her wounded, envious, angry, and jealous. In the weeks that followed, the church world split in two. On one side stood Carn's loyal defenders, preachers, supporters, and prophetic believers who insisted Andria had become a tool of spiritual attack, being used to tear down God's chosen vessel. They flooded timelines with clips of his sermons, resurfaced old prophecies they claimed had manifested, and boldly proclaimed that heaven itself would defend him. Across from them were believers, unsettled by something much deeper, not just about Carn, but about an entire system that protected spiritual leaders who cared more about reputation than righteousness. To them, Andria hadn't started a problem, she had uncovered one. A long-infected wound that no one had been brave enough to expose until now. And once the silence broke, it spread fast. Social media became the arena of confrontation. Twitter debates exploded. YouTube commentary pages dissected every detail. TikTok creators turned the controversy into serialized breakdowns. Every statement, every interview moment, every emotional outburst was clipped, analyzed, debated, and reanalyzed. Hashtags like #Brian Carn exposed and #Andria speaks truth began circulating heavily across Black Christian and gospel-based digital communities. Carn's media team rushed into damage control. Official ministry statements were released, urging followers to stay focused, avoid distractions, and not be led by rumors. He announced new revivals, prayer crusades, and prophetic gatherings, strategically timed reminders of his spiritual influence and authority. But the momentum had already shifted. No sermon stream, no altar moment, no prayer rally was strong enough to fully drown out the echo of Andria's accusations. Old, Footage of previous controversies was dug up again. People began linking incidents that had once seemed random, noticing patterns that had been overlooked or excused in earlier years. Gospel insiders, who had stayed quiet for a long time, began talking privately about what many were now calling an age of accountability in ministry. For years, some argued certain celebrity preachers operated without oversight, shielded by platforms so massive that questioning them felt spiritual dangerous, like criticizing God instead of a man. But the climate was shifting. The rules were changing. Carn found himself standing right at the center of it. Even ministers who had once aligned themselves with him began quietly pulling back. His name slowly vanished from conference banners. Invitations were withdrawn with little explanation. Sponsors who once championed him grew cautious. Media outlets that used to hand him open microphones now pressed him with harder questions. None of it moved him publicly. In interviews that followed, he framed the backlash as spiritual opposition, a trial meant to test purpose. He quoted scripture with conviction: "Weapons may form, but they will not prosper." The message to his followers was clear: he wasn't shaken. He wasn't stopping, and criticism would not change his assignment. But while his stance remained loud, the doubts around him became louder. Because instead of the controversy fading, it evolved. More stories started surfacing, bigger, heavier, and more complex than before. Allegations involving finances, manipulative prophetic seed-sowing practices, and questions surrounding personal relationships began circulating again. This time with more urgency. People were no longer just asking if Andria was telling the truth. They were asking how much she hadn't said. Was her exposure the climax? Or was it only the opening chapter? Because from this point forward, the story wouldn't just get deeper. It would get darker.